Okay, let's unpack this. It feels like, you can't scroll online or talk to anyone under, say, 35 without hearing about the economic headwinds facing young adults today. Are millennials and Gen Z genuinely worse off than their parents or grandparents were at the same stage? Grappling with student debt, sky-high housing costs, a job market that feels like it's constantly shifting? Or is some of this just perception?
That really is the core question for this deep dive, and it's definitely something a lot of people are trying to figure out. We've been looking at recent research, some online discussions too, that try to move past just the anxiety, the headlines, and dig into the actual data, comparing the economic well-being of these younger generations with, baby boomers and Gen X when they were the same age. So the goal here is really to bring some clarity. We'll look at how technology is reshaping jobs, what the numbers say about wealth and income, and maybe why there's this disconnect between stats and, well, how people feel.
Okay, good. So let's start there with the shifting job market. Automation, technology, it's always in the news. What are we finding about how this specifically affects younger workers, the ones just starting out?
Yeah, it's interesting how the thinking on this has changed. Initially, the focus was a lot on skill-biased technological change. The idea was tech helps high-skilled workers and hurts low-skilled ones.
Right, that makes intuitive sense.
But the more current view is what they call a task-based approach.
Okay, task-based, so meaning it's less about your overall skill level and more about the specific tasks you do day to day.
Exactly. Routine tasks, things that follow really predictable patterns, whether they're manual, like working on an assembly line, or cognitive, like, say, a lot of data entry jobs. Those are the ones most easily taken over by software or robots.
Yeah.
Think about jobs with lots of repetition, really clearly defined steps. Processing orders, assembling things, cleaning, even some farming tasks.
Yeah, you can picture a machine doing that pretty easily. What about the jobs that need more, I don't know, human touch?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Tasks that require flexibility, creativity, problem solving, managing people, strong communication, social interaction, those are much harder to automate. Think about artisans adapting their craft, chefs creating new dishes, mechanics figuring out weird car problems, leadership roles, talking with clients. These lean heavily on things that are, well, uniquely human for now.
Right. And are we seeing this play out in the real world? What do the studies show?
We did see research looking at companies adopting new tech, like ICT, information and communication technologies, and often these firms saw boosts in productivity, higher output, which could mean they need more workers, within that specific company.
But there's a catch.
Well, the catch is that those studies don't always tell you the whole story for the entire economy. So total employment across the board or average wages for everyone. Because sure, one company might hire more people to manage new systems, but maybe another company using older methods struggles or shrinks.
But gains in one spot might not balance out losses elsewhere, looking bigger picture.
Exactly that. And we also saw research tracking automation growth over time. It found a link, a correlation between rising automation and higher unemployment in areas where those routine automatable jobs were concentrated.
So regions heavily relying on those kinds of jobs might see job numbers go down as tech advances.
That's what the data suggests, yeah. It points towards a negative impact in those specific areas.
Okay, let's circle back to young workers then. Are they getting hit harder by this shift away from routine tasks?
That's a really key question. And you have to think about the kinds of jobs people often get right out of school or as their first job. Sometimes those are the roles with more routine tasks. We saw some data showing a dip in the employment rate for the youngest group, like 18 to 22-year-olds. But interestingly, for the slightly older group, maybe 23 to 29, one study actually showed a small increase in their employment rate.
Huh. So it's not just a simple story of young people lose out. It's more nuanced.
Right. And another piece is that skill levels are actually rising across the board for all age groups, including younger workers. It suggests people are adapting, learning new things to meet what the job market demands now. It's like this constant race to keep up with the tech.
So if we were to sort of summarize this bit on automation,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely changing the game, hitting those routine tasks hard, which can affect entry-level roles often taken by young people. But it's not hitting everyone the same way, and people are adapting by skilling up.
That's a good way to put it. The nature of work is evolving, and yeah, that definitely impacts those just starting their careers.
Okay, really interesting points. Let's move on then. We hear constantly about the financial struggles, right? Millennials, Gen Z, how do they actually stack up financially compared to previous generations when they were the same age?
Okay, yeah, this is where some of the data might surprise people. When you adjust for inflation, millennials in 2022 actually had a higher median net worth than Gen X did back in 2007 at a similar age point, and also higher than baby boomers back in 1989, again, comparing them at similar ages.
Higher net worth. Really? That seems counterintuitive to the narrative we usually hear.
It does, doesn't it? And there's more. Millennials are also more likely to have assets compared to previous generations at that age, but, and this is a big but, they're also more likely to be carrying debt.
Ah, okay. Assets and debt.
Exactly. And another point, looking at income over time, say from age 25 to 34, the median cumulative income for midpoint millennials was higher than it was for midpoint Gen Xers or boomers during that same age span. Again, inflation adjusted.
So higher net worth, higher cumulative income. Why on earth is the perception so strong that they're worse off? What's
Yep.
going on there?
This is the crucial piece, I think. It boils down significantly to costs, especially for big ticket items like housing. The cost of rent and buying a home is just astronomically higher for millennials compared to what their parents or grandparents faced.
Okay, give me some examples. How much higher are we talking?
Well, think about median rent. In 2024, what a millennial might pay is significantly more than what a Gen Xer paid in, say, 2008 or a boomer paid in 1990, even after you account for inflation over those years. The difference is really stark. And buying a house, forget about it for many, that standard 20% down payment on a median-priced home in 2024 requires vastly more cash than the inflation-adjusted amount needed back in 2008 or 1990. It's a huge barrier.
Wow. So even if income is up a bit, these massive costs, especially housing, are eating way more into it, potentially.
Potentially, yes. Although, interestingly, one finding was that despite these higher overall expenses, millennials actually spend a smaller portion of their income compared to Gen X and boomers at similar ages.
Wait, they spend less of their income? How did that work if costs are so high?
It's a bit puzzling, but there are theories. Maybe they're more financially cautious, having come of age during recessions like 2008. Perhaps they're delaying big life milestones, marriage, kids, buying that house, or living with parents longer, which cuts down certain expenses.
That makes sense. So the financial picture is better in some ways according to the data, but the cost of fundamental things like a place to live is way, way higher. And maybe they're adapting by being more frugal or delaying things.
That seems to be a reasonable interpretation of the numbers in the context, yeah.
Okay, so we have the subjective data, but then there's the subjective feeling, right? You mentioned online discussions where people just feel worse off. What drives that sentiment?
Right. We looked into some of those discussions, like on Reddit threads, and people bring up really valid points that maybe don't show up cleanly in median net worth stats. Things like wage stagnation, feeling like pay hasn't kept up with the real cost of living, even if median income is technically higher. The crazy cost of essentials, not just housing, but healthcare, childcare. Growing wealth inequality is another big one. People see the ultra-rich getting richer and feel like the ladder's being pulled up. The housing market feels overinflated, unattainable. And a lack of retirement savings is a huge source of anxiety.
Yeah, you hear that constantly, the feeling of running faster just to stay in place.
Exactly. And it affects life beyond just finances. Lower rates of marriage, having kids, those are tied into economic stability or the lack thereof. There's also the argument that, okay, maybe global wealth is higher, but if the cost of basic necessities in your city or country makes it hard to get by, that global number doesn't feel very relevant.
True. You can have amazing technology, great entertainment access, but if you can't afford rent or healthcare.
Precisely. It's that contrast, access to cheap gadgets versus the struggle for fundamental security. People in those online chats also brought up historical context, saying past generations had different huge challenges like the draft or major social upheaval, not just economic ones.
That's a fair point. It's never easy, just different challenges. Beyond the pure economics, though, are there other factors hitting well-being?
Definitely. The housing affordability crisis isn't just a financial problem, it takes a psychological toll. It can lead to serious anxiety, frustration, feeling like you failed, even if you're working hard. And there's research linking broader economic downturns like high unemployment or falling house prices to worse mental health outcomes, even in children and adolescents. So economic insecurity ripples outwards, affecting young adults' mental well-being too.
So the stress itself is a major factor. Okay, one more area, labor mobility. How does the ability or inability to move jobs or locations play into this for young workers facing automation and high costs?
Yeah, going back to that automation study, one of the assumptions, at least in the short run, was limited geographical mobility. People don't just instantly pack up and move when jobs change in their area.
Right, that's realistic.
But mobility isn't just about moving towns, it's also about moving across occupations. And the research did find that jobs with more routine tasks saw their share of total employment go down between 2006 and 2015. People were shifting, or needing to shift, into different kinds of work.
And did that affect wages?
Yes, it seems so. The impact of automation on wages was negatively related to how routine the job was. Basically, wages in those more routine jobs appeared more vulnerable to downward pressure from automation. So if you're in a routine job, not only is the job itself potentially at risk, but your wages might also face pressure even if you keep the job. Mobility into less routine work becomes really important.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So bringing this all together, it's a really complex picture, isn't it?
It really is. No simple yes or no answer to whether young adults are worse off.
Right. On one hand, some data like median net worth and cumulative income looks, perhaps surprisingly, better for millennials compared to previous generations at the same age. But on the other hand, they face absolutely brutal costs for essentials, especially housing, and the job market is being reshaped by automation, putting pressure on certain types of roles and wages.
And that feeling of being worse off seems very real, driven by those high costs, anxieties about the future, maybe wealth inequality, and the psychological stress of it all. It's a mix of tangible economic realities and maybe shifting expectations about what constitutes a good life.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. As automation keeps advancing and the cost of living likely stays high, what are the crucial skills, the key adaptations young adults will need to really thrive in the economy ahead? And beyond individual adaptation, what role should policy or maybe innovation play in making sure there's genuine economic opportunity across all generations? Something to think about.